Let's talk about revival. It's a word we hear a lot, and it usually brings up images of huge crowds and, a lot of intense emotion. But what if I told you that the biblical idea of revival is something totally different? We're going to get into the real anatomy of revival, which is less about a temporary feeling and way more about a deep, structural, and lasting change for an entire community.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll nail down what biblical revival actually is. Then, we'll look at a perfect case study, King Joash, to see it in action. From there, we'll do a rapid-fire comparison between the real deal and the knockoffs. We'll also tackle the tough subject of why real change costs something. And finally, we'll ask, what on earth would a revival look like today in our digital world?
All right, first things first, we have to start with a solid definition, because honestly, the way the Bible talks about revival is way more specific and frankly more radical than how we usually throw the term around today. It's probably not what you think.
So check this out. Right off the bat, biblical revival is not about one person having a private, emotional moment. It's a community event. It's corporate. It's when a whole group of God's people who have drifted away make a collective U-turn back to Him. So think less about a personal feeling and more like a whole nation correcting its course.
And this is where it gets really interesting. These aren't just vague spiritual ideas. They are concrete, observable actions. We're talking about widespread repentance, a deliberate decision to get back to God's law, the physical destruction of idols, and a total reboot of public worship. And all of that leads to something you can actually see and measure, real, tangible reform in society.
And if you geek out on the original languages, it gets even clearer. The Hebrew word is shuv. It literally means to turn back or to return. It's that national U-turn we were talking about. And then in the New Testament, you have this idea of anazaio, which means to live again or to awaken. It's this picture of a whole community of believers waking up after being spiritually asleep.
Okay, so theory is great, but what does this actually look like in history? Well, let's jump into a textbook example. The story of King Joash gives us an incredible blueprint for what this kind of community-wide restoration is all about.
The revival under Joash? Well, it wasn't a 3-day conference with a great speaker, not at all. It was a massive, carefully planned campaign of public reform. I mean, it changed everything. The government, the economy, the social fabric. It was a complete top-to-bottom reordering of an entire nation.
So how did he do it? Look at this. It was a step-by-step process. First, a public ceremony where the whole nation recommitted to God. Then, they took physical action. They went and demolished the temple of the false god Baal. After that, they repaired their own temple, and, this is key, they completely reorganized the systems for how worship was supposed to happen. This wasn't just a feeling, this was structural change.
Okay, now that we have that picture of Joash in our heads, let's get super practical. We're going to do a little rapid-fire compare and contrast to help us spot the difference between a real revival and the things that just look like one, especially in our own lives.
This chart just cuts right to the chase, doesn't it? On the one hand, in a real revival, your actual habits change in ways you can measure. Prayer isn't just a 911 call, it's on your calendar. Your whole week starts to bend around worship instead of worship having to compete with your entertainment. But the imitation? It's just a temporary spike of inspiration. It's prayer in a crisis. It's feeling isolated instead of connected. The big takeaway here is that real revival reorganizes your life. It doesn't just give you a temporary boost.
And here it is. This is the gut punch for those of us living in the 21st century. Let's be honest, if our screens are still the dominant force in our lives, and our time with God is just an optional thing we try to squeeze in, well, from a biblical standpoint, that's just not revival. Real revival always changes our most fundamental habits.
Okay, so that brings us to what might be the most challenging piece of this whole puzzle. It's a principle we often miss. True, lasting repentance almost always comes with a real, tangible material cost.
So why is that? Why can't we just say we're sorry and move on? Why does turning back to God, according to the Bible, consistently involve giving up stuff that we value, stuff that has actual, real-world worth? It's a pattern that, once you see it, you can't unsee.
I mean, think about it. Way back with the golden calf, an incredibly valuable object, they didn't just tuck it away in a museum. No, they pulverized it. They smashed idolatrous shrines, which, by the way, tanked local economies. And this pattern holds all the way into the New Testament. You see new believers in Ephesus gathering up their magic books, worth a fortune, and having a massive public bonfire.
So here's the why behind it. Here's the principle. Our bad habits are often tied to things we've invested in, whether that's money, time, or emotion. As long as that thing is still valuable or profitable to us, it creates this loop that keeps pulling us back. The material sacrifice is what breaks the cycle. It's what proves our loyalty has actually shifted.
Man, that just says it all, doesn't it? If a spiritual change doesn't cost you anything, if it doesn't affect how you spend your money or your time, it probably isn't going to stick. A tangible sacrifice isn't just for show. It's a sign that the change is real.
Okay, so let's bring all of this home. We've talked about ancient kings and book burnings, but what does any of this have to do with us right now with smartphones in our pockets and endless streams of content at our fingertips?
This is a mind-blowing way to look at it. The ancient idols never really went away, they just changed their clothes. You see, it's not about the physical object, it's about the function, what we're trying to get from it. That addiction to pleasure people sought from a ball cult, we can get that from compulsive media consumption. That desperate need for identity and belonging, we look for that in the validation loops of social media. The technology is different, but the human desire is exactly the same.
And let's be really clear here. A modern revival wouldn't be about going out and smashing all our smartphones. It would be about destroying their mastery over us. It's about a transfer of authority. It's about taking the power over our attention, our time, and our identity away from the algorithm and giving it back to God.
So, when you boil it all down, what's the one thing you should look for? The number one sign of a genuine revival? It's not the emotional highs. It's not the size of the crowd. It is, simply, the durability of changed habits. Does the change last? Is a community still living differently 6 months later, a year later? That's the test.
And this quote just nails the end goal. A true revival reorders our desires so deeply that our relationship with our tools is totally transformed. The phone might still be in your hand, it's a useful tool, but it no longer has a death grip on your heart. It becomes a servant, not a master. And that leaves us with one final thought. What in your life is currently in your heart?